URC week 3 and things are starting to get serious. My name is Mark, let's talk rugby. First off, apologies. This video should have been up yesterday evening, but I had a personal issue that pretty much took over the entire evening, so I couldn't get anything done yesterday. But at least I should get this up a couple of hours before the first games of this round. Not ideal, but it is what it is. So I'm going to be quick with this one. No rants this week. Maybe they'll return next week. We'll see. But yeah, as I was saying, things getting a bit serious now because it's getting to the point now, obviously South African teams only the second game of their season so far, but for the rest of the European teams, third game, this is kind of where you set the trend for your season, whether it's, an okay start can turn into a decent start with a win, and it can go the other way as well and turn into a poor start with a defeat as well. So a lot kind of on the line, and you got a lot of teams as well that are kind of in similar positions facing off against each other. And obviously, one team's trajectory is going to be on the up and the other on the down. So it's a bit of a moving week at the start of the year, I think. And it will be the first time this season as well on Monday when we have our review that we actually look at the table as well, because I think 3 games for most teams and 2 for the South African teams is a decent time to have a look and see how things are shaping up. But let's get into the games. So the game's on tonight, Friday, October the 4th, 7:35 kickoff. So the first game we got Scarlets versus Connacht. So this is 13th versus 3rd. So you've got Scarlets first game did really well, I thought, over in Benetton to get that draw over there. They showed some real grit there. Fell off a little bit, I thought, against Cardiff. I thought they would have given Cardiff a better tougher game than they did. Obviously, it wasn't a one-way score either way, but still, I felt that they would have gotten something bit more out of that game, and maybe would have saw a little bit more progress from them. Then Connacht opening game against Munster, I thought their hands were really slick in that one, and kind of unlucky to come out on the the wrong side of a really scoring, high scoring game there, but losing by 2 points. And then they beat the Sharks then last week, to get themselves on the board as well. So this is a tough one to call, and I'd almost want to say draw, except I don't like sitting on the fence for one, and there aren't that many draws, and Scarlets have already had one anyway. So I'm going to go for, I think I've got to back the Irish team, so I'm going to go for Connacht to win, but Scarlets to get a losing bonus point. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was the other way around, especially Connacht up and down a lot. Seems to be a little more consistent this year, but we'll have to see. This is a test of that, I'd say, for them. But yeah, I'm going to go for Connacht win there. The other game then, another big game here as well. We got Cardiff versus Glasgow. So Cardiff second in the table, only behind Leinster. They got the full maximum 10 points from their opening 2 rounds as well. This is at Cardiff Arms Park. Warriors in 4th. They should have won. Still think they should have beaten Ulster in that opening round, but they came out with a loss, and then a really good win against a very decent Benetton side. Put a lot of points on them. You can see Glasgow really in some decent form, even though they did open with that defeat against Ulster. And because of that, Cardiff have done well in the first 2 rounds, but I think Glasgow are probably going to end their 100% run. So I'm going to go for a Glasgow win in that one, but I expect Cardiff to be certainly more competitive than we saw them, for much of last year as well. Okay, on to the Saturday games then. So first up is the 12:45 kickoff. This is the Lions versus Edinburgh. It's 8 versus 12, and it's at Emirates Airlines Park. So Lions, they started out with the win against Ulster last week. I thought they looked pretty good. Edinburgh, they haven't been too bad this season. Started out with that defeat against Leinster, but it was still a decent turn for them. And then they didn't look too bad against Bulls either. Even though Bulls' first hit out of the season, I thought Bulls actually looked really good, especially on the counter-attack. But Edinburgh, showing a bit more grit in the pack, I felt, than they did last year. They've had, they've obviously got the likes of Van der Merwe and stuff in the back line. Got really exciting back line too. But we're seeing a bit more from the pack as well. But I have to say it's probably going to be a winless tour for Edinburgh, so I'm going to go for a Lions win in that one, and the Lions go for 2 from 2 from the start of the season. Next, then the 3 o'clock kickoff is Bulls versus Ulster, so this is 10th versus 9th. It's at Loftus Versfeld. So Bulls opened up with that win against Edinburgh, as we talked about last week. Ulster, they had to win against Glasgow to start, and then they lost against the Lions. And some of their really good young players are actually in South Africa, but not with them. They're with the emerging Ireland team, the likes of Sheridan and Isichukwu in there, and a couple of others, I think, as well in that squad. And, Ulster at the moment really can't afford, to be missing players of that caliber, I think, from their squad. Their squad doesn't have the depth really there, especially, they're kind of in a rebuilding phase now. And because of that, I feel like the Bulls looked so good last week that, it'd feel like a shock, honestly, for Ulster to pull out a win there. Not saying that they couldn't do it, but, balance of probability, I'm going to go for a Bulls win in that one. Next, then we have the 5:15 kickoff. So this is Benetton versus Leinster. It's 14th versus 1st, and this is at the Stadio Monego. So Benetton, not as good a start to this season as they had last season. They did start with that, draw against Scarlets to begin, and then weren't really, didn't offer that much against Glasgow, and that was a little bit disappointing. And they're going to be at home, obviously, so they're expecting to be better. But I think Leinster, RG Stayman is going to be making his debut in this one as well. I think Leinster are just going to have a little bit too much, for them in that one. I think, for the moment, at least in the first 2 rounds, Leinster got that balance between, having regulars in there and also using the wider squad. And I think, hopefully they've learned the lessons from previous seasons, but we won't really see that until the end of the season. Leinster's goal this year really has to be lifting a trophy, and it's games like this where you're going to kind of see the test of how they're managing their squads. But I think Leinster will come out with a win on this one. But again, Benetton, we're going to see certainly more from them than we have, I think, last week, and probably in the opening 2 rounds, honestly. I think they might, cause Leinster a few problems. Next, then we have another 5:15 kickoff. This is Dragons versus the Sharks, so 11th versus 15th. Dragons opening win. They beat the Ospreys right in the opening round, and then they did well against Leinster. Even though you look at the scoreline, you think they got a bit of hiding, but they actually did well against Leinster. So they're showing. This one's at Rodney Parade, sorry, but they're showing more under Di Flanagan this year than last year. Because for me, if they had continued in the same vein as last year, the questions would have to been asked about where they were going in terms of that, because would have been. I think this will be his 3rd season, his 2nd full season in charge of the Dragons. Yeah, and it would have been a little bit kind of head scratching if they hadn't showed any progress, but they're progressing well. Sharks had a good hit out against Connacht, although they come out on the losing side. Last year's league, didn't go all that well for them. Obviously, they did finish above Dragons, but they didn't finish above too many other teams in the league. So, they can't really rest on their laurels. I think, having won the Challenge Cup last year, they got to produce something in the league this year. And because of that, this is a hard one to call, because Dragons, I feel, really, they've got more chances in games this year, feels like, based on the performances from the opening 2 rounds. But, Sharks, I feel like they've got to start producing wins, especially on the road. So I'm going to go for Sharks winning this one, but for Dragons maybe I could even see Dragons getting 2 bonus points out of this one if they don't actually pull off a win. I think it's going to be a high scoring one. I think, Dragons are going to do pretty well in that one, but I think the Sharks are going to come out with the win. Then next, the 7:35 kickoffs. So the first of those is Zebre versus Stormers. So 6th versus 16th, and it's at the Stadio Sergio Lanfranchi. So Zebre, opening round, they came back well against Cardiff, and then you question mark was whether Cardiff kind of took the foot off the gas, or whether Zebre, kind of legitimately came back at them. It was kind of similar to last year with the Glasgow against the Bulls, where I wasn't sure whether Glasgow, had legitimately come back, or whether the Bulls kind of eased off a little bit. But we saw in the final that it was definitely that, it must have definitely been that Glasgow came back and caused some real problems. And I think it's the same for Zebre, because they went on and they beat Munster last weekend. And we talked about it before, a big win was coming for them, over there in Italy, because they, in Parma, they've just been getting more and more competitive. We're seeing them being a little more competitive on the road as well. And they're kind of following the same, in the footsteps really of Benetton in doing that. You start winning at home, you get competitive away, and then eventually you start winning away as well. And because of that, then you're competitive in the league as a whole. And I think Zebre maybe, I don't think this season we're going to see them pushing for playoff places or anything like that. But I don't think that they're going to be, at the bottom with only one win from the season either. But against the Stormers, who, started their season with that defeat against Ospreys, that's going to sting them a little bit. And again, we talked about last year, they left themselves a lot to do in terms of, getting good position. They did manage to come from outside the playoffs and secure 5th place. But Stormers, based on, previous years, having been the inaugural champions of the URC, they would have wanted to at least finish in the top 4, and they don't want to leave themselves as much to do this year. And because of that, I think, this game here, we're going to see the opening win of the season for the Stormers. But again, we're going to see Zebre kind of push them, I think, a lot in the game as well. And at the moment, it's 6th versus 16th, but I think, later on in the season, they'll be at the kind of switch ends of the table, if you like, or at least that's what I expect. The final game of the weekend then is Munster versus Ospreys, so 7th versus 5th. This is at Virgin Media Park. And honestly, Munster, they haven't produced a decent performance for me this year. They were lucky in that opening win against Connacht. I felt the Connacht were certainly the more fluid of the two teams. Munster's backline, and not just their backline, just their attack play, broke down a lot of handling errors, a lot of kind of, people not quite getting the running lines correct and that kind of stuff as well. But they dug out a win there anyway. And then against Zebre, they fell behind. They got themselves back, in front by half time, and then in the second half, then they fell away again. So, it's a worry, honestly, for Munster that we haven't seen a good performance from them, because last year, they had to kind of, they were another team that had to come late in the league, and they did produce some great form going into the playoff places. But they did really well as well to time their run in terms of the league. But you can't be doing that every year. They're a team who they're good enough to be up there to point the end of the table for most of the season. And with that, you've got to win games like this. They're playing against Ospreys, who, they had that win last week against the Stormers. Really good win. I felt they were poor compared to last year in the opening game that lost to the Dragons, but returned to form a little bit against the Stormers. But now, can they do it away from home? And this is another one for these two teams where, if Munster lose this one, then it's definitely a poor start to the season for them. But if they win, 2 wins out of 3, you can't really complain too much about that. And then the same for Ospreys as well. Both of them are kind of in the same position where, a win for this, you kind of look at it and say, yeah, that's a pretty decent start to the season. And a loss, then you're looking at it in terms of they've got to produce a win soon, to get their season kick-started then. So a big game there to finish the weekend, and I think it's going to be a Munster win for that one. Okay, so that's where I'm going to leave it for that. Hopefully I don't ramble on too much longer, but let me know what you think of, how the weekend's going to go, what you think of my predictions, and just how you think the league is going as well. For me, it's been a really good opening 2 rounds, and I hope it's going to be, a third round to kind of add to that as well. But that's it for me, and I'll see you guys on the next one.